What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back to talk a little bit more free agency and offseason for the Detroit Lions. Today, we have some more free agency news to discuss, but also we're going to be taking a little bit of a look into the future. We've talked a lot about these contracts and these void years. Today, we're going to dive a little bit into what that's going to mean for 2024. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to my video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we are back with another offseason video, another free agency video for the Lions. And we're going to start with the news first, and then we'll get into diving in a little bit into what the outlook is for 2024 with some of these signings that we've made so far and how we've set up some of these contracts. Still, some of them we don't know. I still don't have the details on Graham Glasgow. We don't have the details on Jalen Reeves-Maybin, even though I'm hearing that it's a one-year deal now, so that seems kind of official. And, of course, this one, which is the Detroit Lions reportedly are re-signing quarterback Nate Sudfeld. Now, again, I don't know how long this is set for. I would assume it's for a year. I don't know the details on this, but Nate Sudfeld is reportedly going to be back with the Lions for another season. Before we talk about the player, this was something that felt super necessary. In my opinion, I thought the Lions, maybe we're going to go with a different name. I kind of had that feeling. There was kind of like a sense of it that the Lions were going to sign someone different in free agency. But a lot of these backup quarterbacks that I personally like, just based on what Ben Johnson speak on of third downs and 2-minute drills and quarterbacks showing up in those moments. The quarterbacks that I liked in those spots, a lot of them were being signed last week. So for me, I was kind of like, ooh, I don't know where the Lions are going to go with this. Maybe there's someone out there that they like that I'm just not aware of, but a lot of the guys that I liked were getting signed. But this is something that I felt like was going to be necessary for the Lions. I have a pretty good feeling the Lions are going to come into next year with 3 quarterbacks. Some of these backups, everybody knows Hendon Hooker. He's coming off an injury. We'll see if he's ready. But also for a lot of these guys, right, the Lions aren't looking to draft a starter at quarterback. They want a developmental backup. So for most cases, a lot of cases, you necessarily wouldn't want to put that guy into a situation during the season, right? You would prefer to have that backup that you know can get you through the game, maybe pick up a couple of big-time third downs, that can get you through a few weeks if necessary. You don't necessarily want that to be that quarterback that you drafted unless maybe if it's like a round 1 pick or something like that. And then also having a backup quarterback that can work with that developmental quarterback while your starter, Goff, preparing for the game, he can work with him, help him along the side, help him prepare. So maybe a guy that has a little bit more vet experience, has been around the league for a while, that can help that guy kind of develop into that position while your starter is starting. But even then, it depends on who that quarterback is because, again, the Lions aren't looking for a starter. So I kind of believe the Lions are going to be coming into next year with 3 quarterbacks on their depth chart. I know a lot of times we don't see them do that, but because I think they're going to draft one, I think they'll end up with 3. So this was a move that I thought was necessary. Then it was just, who are the Lions going to sign as their next backup quarterback? And reportedly, it's going to be Nate Sudfeld. Now, one thing that I think could be very important to this is, of course, how much it costs the Detroit Lions. When you look at a lot of these quarterbacks that have already signed deals, some of these backups, Andy Dalton, 2 years, $10 million. It's like 5 a year. Jacoby Brissett, who I liked, but I knew that he was going to cost some money just because he can actually play, man. $8 million for a 1-year deal. Jarrett Stidham, I really like Stidham. 2 years, $10 million deal, right? So you have even Cooper Rush, 2 years, $5 million. Gardner Minshew, I like Minshew, 1 year, $3.5 million. That's not huge, but I would assume Nate Sudfeld is probably like 3 times cheaper than that. Like, I would assume Nate Sudfeld's probably just around $1 million, probably somewhere around the minimum. I would assume this is not going to be a big contract for Sudfeld. I could be wrong. But for the quarterback that is now 29 years old, he hasn't played a ton in the NFL. So I don't think that this is someone that was going to get a ton of money on the market. But the Lions are doing it now. It's something that Brad Holmes said that it was kind of an emphasis that it wasn't going to be last year where they were kind of scrambling for quarterbacks and trying to find someone. And actually the guy that they found right before the season was Nate Sudfeld. They picked him up from the San Francisco 49ers. He was basically released because of the amount of quarterbacks they had. They had 3 quarterbacks. They had Trey Lance, who they drafted. They had Brock Purdy, who they just drafted. They also had Jimmy Garoppolo. They were loaded at quarterback. So for them, they couldn't really keep Nate Sudfeld. Now, I, at the time, went back and watched Nate Sudfeld's preseason with the San Francisco 49ers. I thought he actually looked pretty good in the preseason. Definitely in comparison to what we had with Tim Boyle and David Blau, some of the struggles that we had there was much better, in my opinion. But even then, I was like, man, he looks actually really good. And I was hoping we get a chance to see him. Last year, he came in for the one drive after the big run by Jamal. Jared Goff came out. We were winning the game big, but he didn't actually get to throw the ball. He got hit on the one opportunity. He had to drop back and pass. He got hit. So we didn't actually get to see him throw a ball because he also wasn't here for preseason. So we never got to see him throw in a Lions uniform. They did in practice, but we did not. So I was curious to see it. We just didn't get to see it. You can see last year's preseason numbers with San Fran, 68% completion percentage, about 6.68 yards per attempt. So that's not just receptions, that's per attempt. 2 touchdowns to 1 pick. He had a 93.5 passer rating. And then in his career, those are his regular season stats. Again, he hasn't played a lot here. He had one game where he was very cautious with the Philadelphia Eagles, and then outside of that, he's just been kind of spots. But 25 for 37, 188, one touchdown, one pick, 77.3 passer rating. I liked his preseason film with San Fran. I was actually really happy about the signing. Look at who is also available. I mean, probably the biggest name that's still available at quarterback that could be a realistic backup is probably Teddy Bridgewater. I don't know if I could say I loved Teddy Bridgewater when I went and watched it, but I understood the connections there. Also, you had Chase Daniel. Again, he's like 36. Didn't know if the Lions would want to go down that road again. Josh Johnson. Like this, based on where the free agent market was at, it makes sense that this guy would be brought back. I wonder if the Lions had eyes on other guys and the prices maybe got a little bit too high for him, or the other guys just chose elsewhere, because really, if you're coming here with the Lions, there's probably a good shot that you're not going to get an opportunity to be a starter. If we're being honest, I mean, because Goff is going to start now. And then you also you're probably going to draft a quarterback. So you're not going to overlap him most likely. So your best chance here would be somehow trying to find the field. Maybe that's preseason, maybe that's in a regular season game, and then maybe someone else signs you. So there was probably also not a lot of quarterbacks that were like, yeah, I want to go to Detroit, because it doesn't seem to make a ton of sense if you want to potentially down the road be a starter. So with that being said, Nate Sudfeld is back with the Lions. I don't dislike this. I was hoping we get to see him last year. We just did not. But I think maybe those are some of the reasons why this is the case. Definitely showed some accuracy, a little bit of athleticism when you watched him for San Fran. Not the biggest arm in terms of velocity, but he could push the ball downfield a little bit. You saw some 15, 20-yard passes down the sideline. Like, he could push the ball. He just didn't have a ton of velocity on his passes. But Nate Sudfeld, I thought he had a good preseason, and I'm not mad at the Lions bringing him back now. I thought this was something that could potentially happen after the draft. I think the biggest thing about Sudfeld is the similarities to how we run our offense concepts-wise with Goff. I mean, he doesn't have the biggest arm. He's a little bit more of an anticipation thrower, but you saw understanding. He played both the Vikings and Packers in this past preseason, so there's that. And he led a good 2-minute drive. I mean, here you get kind of that little bench look. Then here on the rollout, show that athleticism. Probably my favorite throw. I mean, he doesn't escape the pocket extremely well. But look at this one. 3rd and long, steps up, delivers. That was a 2-minute drive that he led. But then you could see some of the lack of arm strength, so we have to play with a little bit more anticipation. But at this point in time, the Lions decided to do it before, but it was necessary. They had to get some sort of backup that they felt comfortable with stepping in, and I think they feel that way with Sudfeld, and maybe they liked him during practice and they felt that way. And now we have some news that it's actually just popped up, and that is that DJ Chark is signing with the Carolina Panthers. It says reportedly on a 1-year deal. It's actually something I brought up yesterday that it kind of felt like it was potentially going to happen, and maybe the Lions would do it. It's a big reason. Maybe I thought they saved more cap space this year than next year just to potentially be able to give him a 1-year deal, and he actually did sign another prove-it deal. He maybe didn't get that multi-year deal. Unfortunately, it's just not back with the Lions. Carolina Panthers would have offered more, or maybe the Lions didn't offer. I'm not saying, I don't know if the Lions were interested, but I'm just saying if they were, maybe it was that they offered more. Maybe he felt like it was a much easier projection into a top role because DJ Moore's not there. Here you still have Jameson, we know St. Brown, and then on top of that, if he thinks the Lions are going to draft somebody, then I guess it could be tougher to be like the top guy. But even with that, I don't know. DJ Chark is signing a 1-year deal. Chark put this out there, and I'm just going to be a theorist here. You can see he says, I believe transparency and honesty is everything. I'm not sure what he's talking about here, if that's about the Lions or if that's saying the Lions did that. Could he be talking about he thought that he would get an extension here and the Lions would offer him that if he had improved himself in a 1-year deal? As I said before, I could understand why the Lions look at what he did, having the injury, the production, and saying, you know what, maybe it's not worth giving that big-term deal out to, right? I understood that side of it, so maybe he's talking about that. Maybe he's not. I could just be reaching on this one. What we're seeing here with the cap space that the Lions created yesterday, and again, when you look at their over-the-cap situation, $26 million of cap space without knowing Jalen, Graham Glasgow, and now Nate Sudfeld's deal. I'm not saying this is something that the Lions are actually looking into necessarily, but I think it's something that was brought up yesterday. I thought it was kind of brought up as a joke because Ed Oliver was posting, pictures of him sacking all the NFC North quarterbacks. He put all of them on there. However, I did want to at least bring it up because Ed Oliver's situation, $10 million cap hit because he's on his 5th-year option. Could the Detroit Lions be interested there? I mean, maybe. Wouldn't it be a weird thing that the guy that was drafted literally right next to T.J. Hockenson in the draft, who you traded away, right, who had his 5th-year option picked up, he's got 1 year left now, and his cap hit's going to jump to like $9.5 million. Instead, you go with a different position, which you could argue is much more of a premium position. Ed Oliver, a 6'1", basically 285-pound, explosive, 3-tech defensive tackle. Definitely undersized. Honestly, when I watch Ed Oliver, he reminds me a lot of Kalijah Kancey in this year's draft. One, because of build, his arm length isn't that long. It's under 32 inches. But just this play style, the explosiveness, and that's how he wins. Now, for him, the concern was coming out of college that he was playing under 280 in college, which is concerning for the NFL projection, and we're going to have to deal with down blocks, double teams, things like that. And I thought when I watched him, some of the games that I've just went through just just to check on him. I thought, okay, there was awareness, to try to protect himself in those situations, but he could be washed out of down blocks, out of double team blocks. So I'm not sure if the Lions would be interested in a guy of that size, but if they were, because we know that is their biggest need right now, in my opinion, is that 3-tech defensive tackle. He would only be on a 1-year deal, so I wouldn't think that the Lions would be willing to give up a ton of draft capital for him. The Lions, one of the teams that actually may have cap space to be able to do something like this with that Oliver, could get that 3-tech for 1 year, and then it could open up the draft to potentially draft another defensive tackle that's more developmental. I don't know, maybe a Carl Brooks who needs to get stronger out of BGSU. Maybe something like that, but then it gives you that 1 year explosive, twitchy defensive tackle that's plug-in and play right now. Great leverage because of his height. You have a lot of plays where he's just running guys over. He's a consistent 30 pressure type of player to make counter pass rush moves. Again, if you're looking at a guy like that's twitchy and explosive like this, you could say, well, just take Cansey. I get it. I understand that. But again, the draft is kind of light with a lot of these types of players. Now, again, he's a little bit on the undersized side, and there's definitely a lot of guys like that in this draft. There's guys that are undersized playing defensive tackle. He's still a little bit in that category, but I don't think he's terrible against the run. But you will get glimpses of him having problems due to his size. And I thought I would at least bring it up. Is it something that's possible? The guy had 40 pressures in 2021. He's a consistent 30 pressure type of player. Clearly, he doesn't feel great about the Bills situation and maybe the fact that they haven't given him an extension. But coming here wouldn't necessarily mean that he does get that extension unless the Lions told him, hey, we're re-signing you. I don't know. I don't know why the Bills would move him. He's a good player. But with that being said, it's something to keep an eye on. Maybe it's something to keep an eye on because Lions could actually have cap space for it. And Ed Oliver's fun to watch. He's still young, 25 years old, because he's only in that 5th-year option. All right, so this is what I put together last night. Now, these are the players that are currently under contract for the Detroit Lions heading into 2024. And we have broken this down before. You can definitely go check out that video because it's much more of a breakdown. Basically, what I did is I talked about how Brad Holmes set the Lions up for the future, and it's super dangerous because of how well he's done in the draft. He's almost accelerated how fast the Lions have gotten to this point. We've done so well in the draft that we've gotten here so quickly. Like, a lot of times you draft players understanding, okay, what are they going to be by year 2, right? The Lions are getting guys that are extremely productive in year 1. I think a lot of times that's forgotten that's a lot of times the way that you approach drafting. Outside of round 1, you're looking for what are they going to be, in year 2. But for the Lions, so many of their draft picks have come in and produced year 1, which is, again, not a lot of times outside of round 1 what you're actually aiming for when you draft these players. So with that being said, because of how well the Lions have done, how quickly guys have been able to impact the team. So as you can see, all the players here in white are players that are currently under contract through 2024, which is next season. If they're in yellow, I put those guys on here because there's maybe an easier path to bringing them back, but they're not necessarily under contract, right? If you have an RFA, means you're a restricted free agent, then the Lions could potentially place a tender on that player, right refusal, those kind of things. And if you're an ERFA, you're an exclusive rights free agent next year, which means the Lions just have to tender that contract and they can have you back on the minimum, and there's no guarantees to the deal. So that's almost like having them under contract. If you want them, you can have them. The biggest one there is probably James Houston for the edge rusher position. But also thing I want to point out here is when you look at the bottom, you can see the void year money. $12.32 million in dead cap basically for next season, set up by the void years that the Lions have currently given out. Also players with void years down the road like Taylor Decker, Tracy Walker, Cam Sutton, David Montgomery, Alex Anzalone. Those players also have void years down the road, but void years for 2024, those are the players that currently have those. Romeo Quarles, Charles Harris, Big V, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and Emmanuel Mosley. And that makes up $12.3 million in dead cap basically because of those void years. Now again, if you extend those, it can change because you can get the contract back and you can kind of put it into it. But the point is, when it's a void year, you're paying that and the player's not on the roster. So the Lions, it's actually not as high as the number as I kind of expected. When we kind of do all these like contract updates, you start to look at them, you're like, man, there's a lot of guys here. It's actually not that terrible. And what I put on the left is something that I think is important to keep in mind. This year's cap number was set at $224.8 million, okay? Next year is expected to be at $256. Now, that's according to over the cap. So, and again, I forgot the dot in there, so I apologize. That looks weird. Next year expected to be 256. Now, that may not be accurate. It could definitely be lower than that. But what I'm showcasing that is even if it's somewhat close to that number, that's going to be much more than the $12 million in void money that we have for next year. Which basically means I'm saying if the cap number rises by more money than the void years that you have for next year, it's almost like, in a sense, you're not even feeling it. I mean, you still are because everybody's having their cap rise. Also, look at the Lions salary cap calculator according to over the cap where it's at about $26 million. We don't know about the Jalen Reeves-Maybin deal. We don't know the details on Graham Glasgow, and now we don't know them on Nate Sudfeld either, so those will impact it as well. But then you also have the situation of potentially having money roll over at the end of the season, which is something that you tell the league at the end of the regular season. So that's not something that would happen right now, but you could also have potentially a little bit of rollover money if the Lions come in with a good amount of cap space and go through the season and they still have some left over. They could potentially roll some over into 2024 as well to help them out. But as you can see, the void year is not a killer there. But here's where you get excited when you look at how many assets the Lions actually have. On the right, you can see their draft picks for the next 2 seasons. We know things like this change, but there's 15 total draft picks here for the Lions in the next 2 seasons. Obviously, this year we have 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a third-round pick. 2024, we have a first, second, and then 2 third-round picks. We don't have our fourth because of the T.J. Hockenson trade, but we do have an extra third because of the T.J. Hockenson trade, which is also why we have an extra second this year because of the T.J. Hockenson trade. So you have all of that draft capital, and then on top of that, at the top, you can see $69.9 million in effective cap space, which at the time is 10th in the NFL. Effective cap space, I believe, means including basically filling that roster to the top 51 and the rookie draft class. So Lions 10th in effective cap space. And then you have to say, okay, well, what do we need by 2024? Like, what would our needs be? Well, on the top right, I listed what I think our needs are based on who's under contract through 2024. Obviously, the 3-tech defensive tackle is still something that's there. Now, Bugs will actually be under contract, so he'll give us some depth still. That's the biggest need in general to me right now still, and which is why the Ed Oliver stuff has come up, and we'll touch on that. But that's the biggest one still. Okay, obviously, if you feel that and you look at the defensive line, you have Pascal now, Kaminsky, McNeil, now Bugs, Levi, all under contract through 2024. Okay, the edge rusher position, you can see a little bit lighter. Now, Houston, if you want to bring him back, you probably will. I'm assuming he will be. So you can kind of act like you have Houston and Hutchinson both under contract, which means you're probably going to want to find some depth. You may want to find a starter. It's why this year I have the Lions probably taking like a developmental, at least edge rusher, but I think that could range in a lot of different ways for the Lions because a lot of the guys they currently have, Julian, Romeo, Charles, a lot of these guys are on 1-year deals with the Lions currently. So because of that, you're going to have a lot of guys that aren't under contract next year, and Romeo, again, is one of those void years. Linebacker's a position now where, again, Jalen's projected to be a 1-year deal. Pittman will be a restricted free agent next year, so you could potentially easier bring him back. But for the Lions, they still have 3 linebackers under contract. We heard Brad Holmes say he felt like that position was a strength. He felt like that position was a strength after this past season, like that linebacker group that the Lions have. But they still have all 3 of those guys under contract next year. Now, cornerback, which was probably the lightest position coming into free agency for the future, still is pretty light. Cam Sutton, now on a 3-year deal, is someone that will be here, as well as Chase Lucas. But outside of that, you have a lot of nobody under contract. Jacobs is a restricted free agent, so he could be a little bit easier to get back. Khalil Dorsey's restricted free agent. Mac McCain's an exclusive rights free agent, so he could be easy to bring back. But none of those guys have really proven anything. Jaron Williams, exclusive rights free agent, hasn't proven anything in the NFL. Jeff Okudah could potentially have his 5th-year option picked up. Still, that's still an option for the Lions. But as of now, that hasn't happened. It doesn't seem like it will, which is why cornerback, I still say I think the Lions are going to draft an outside cornerback at some point in this draft. And I think it could be relatively high just because of the future of that. We know cornerback can take time to develop. It's great to have guys that can plug in now, but we can get future. And again, this is back to the point that I made. Outside of round 1, a lot of times you're saying, what can they be year 2? That's where you're grading these guys on. So what's important about that is that when you look at the Lions and say, man, why all these proven? Why all these 1-year deals? Why not lock everybody up? Well, you're giving yourself so much flexibility because for the Lions, because they have Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley, I can't even think of names, Will Harris, Jeff Okudah, Jerry Jacobs. They have all these cornerbacks under contract for this year, right? Next year, they don't. But if you drafted someone this year, what do we think he's going to be in year 2 with a year to develop, year to kind of fill into it and get comfortable? The Lions now, because of how well they drafted these past 2 years, and now that their cap space has finally opened up this year and they're backloading a lot of these deals to allow themselves to sign a lot of 1-year deals, but they're not just signing 1-year deals to players. Giving out a 1-year deal to a guy that hasn't done anything is fine, but they're giving out 1-year deals to guys that have earned it and proven it, right? So now you have a little bit more sustainability for that 1 year. But that means that the Lions could take a cornerback somewhere in this draft, and they could actually be true to their evaluation of what is he going to be in year 2? Well, that's what we're grading, and that's what we're expecting, and he may not even have to do much in year 1, which would be perfect for him. It's something that I thought would kind of happen with Iffy, and I guess in a sense it kind of did because he didn't really play till the end of the year, right? And he was changing positions, so it's kind of a similar situation. Safety is clearly on lock through 2024. CJ Moore, Tracy, Iffy, and Joseph are all under contract. Goff is under contract. Our quarterback on offense, we don't have our number 2. Assume they're going to draft someone, so I'm assuming that's going to change. So for at least this year, I thought it was necessary the Lions would sign a quarterback to be a backup. But after this year, you could feel good about that draft pick and like, hey, you know, if Goff we missed a game or whatever and we had to put someone in, maybe they feel good enough about that second-year player now to step into a game. So we may not even need to find one next season. Running back, David Montgomery's locked up. Now it's just about finding that number 2. We know Swift is here. Those guys, again, it gives the Lions more flexibility in this year's draft. Running back is usually never the most expensive position when it comes to free agency anyways, but the Lions seemingly have their number 1 locked in for multiple years, which is great. Wide receiver is another position. It's a little bit lighter with Jameson and St. Brown. It's a great start. You don't really have your number 2 locked in for the future. DJ Chark actually just signed with the Carolina Panthers, so he's not coming back with the Lions this year. Josh Khalifa. You have a lot of guys for this year, but that's why I have the Lions think they may draft a developmental outside receiver, because then again in year 2, if you like him by year 2, maybe he could fill into that. Tight end, again, this is a position where a lot of these guys, Deese could be brought back, Zylster, right? They're probably not going to be super expensive, but the point is, James Mitchell's under contract, so it's more about depth there. And then offensive line. Offensive line is probably the biggest one, because there's not a lot of these positions, if you notice I'm going through, where we're saying starters. Except for offensive line, because now Big V has a void year next year. Jonah Jackson's not under contract. Now, based on what the Lions saved with Big V, I could see them re-signing Jonah Jackson next season. That still leaves one guard position open. Now, I would say, well, hey, that means you got to draft one. I don't think that necessarily means the Lions would have to draft one this year. You can have offensive linemen a lot of times be able to plug in and play immediately, especially at the guard positions. That happens a ton. And the reason I could see them doing it, but you don't want to just do it to do it. We got Glasgow, we got Big V, we have our immediate guys right now. Next year we'll figure out Jonah Jackson, and if we need another guard, which we would at that point, then yeah, then you could potentially look to draft one or sign one. So not saying they can't, I'm just saying. And then special teams, you have Fox under contract. Badgley is not. Wouldn't be surprised the Lions draft a kicker this year. But the point is, you have the 10th most effective cap space, you have 15 draft picks, and for a lot of positions, you're drafting depth. And why is that? Because of how well you've done in the draft has allowed you to do that for the most part. Like, look at a lot of these top guys. Rodriguez, draft pick. Barnes, draft pick, even though he's not a big-time starter for us. Hutchinson, draft pick. Houston, draft pick. Pascal, draft pick. McNeil, draft pick. Now, Levi hasn't really hit to this point because of injuries. But even Buggs and Kaminsky, got to give them credit because they found these guys super cheap. One was a waiver wire claim. The other one was, like, right before the season. I mean, cornerback, Chase Lucas was a draft pick. That one's light. But safety, Walker, one of your biggest re-signings. Iffy was a draft pick. Kirby was a draft pick, right? You're looking just across the board. A lot of these guys are draft pick. Jameson, draft pick. St. Brown, draft pick. Mitchell's draft pick. Sewell, draft pick. It's like a lot of this is set up by what you've done in the draft. So the Lions' future is bright. Just to reiterate that, what I've said before, the Lions' future is super bright here. So that's what I'm trying to showcase you guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.